Over 17 years of experience in the IT security and infrastructure space. In that time, Chris has specialized in providing security solutions to protect Fortune 500 businesses, gas, energy, commercial, healthcare, state and local government, verticals with various security organizations. Most recently, Chris is a director at Veriti, now Checkpoint, which specializes in threat exposure management. Please welcome Chris.
All right. Thank you so much, Sam. All right, well, it's towards the end of the day, and I'm probably, between you and a drink or getting back on the road. So we'll keep it light. You guys are here because of your interest in potentially continuous threat exposure management, and that's where we're going to really focus on today. Has anybody heard of CTEM or continuous threat exposure management, or is this a new concept? Okay, we've got one, maybe two in here. Okay, so we'll start at sort of the ground level of what CTEM is. It is a concept, it's a capability that we bring to bear. Continuously evaluating your infrastructure to look for vulnerabilities and threats. And one of the key things that we really focus on is to really basically de-silo the security technologies. We all have different environments where we have a lot of different vendors, a lot of different technologies from different origins, different manufacturers. And the promise of CTEM is the opportunity to de-silo these security technologies so that they can more effectively work with one another. So for example, your CrowdStrike talks to your Fortinets. Your Fortinets now talk to Palos, and so forth. Also being able to enrich the infrastructure using vulnerability data. So think about Tenable, Rapid7, and things of that nature. The point I'm going to make a couple times today is that we are de-siloing security technologies, but we're not displacing existing investments in your infrastructure. We are bringing them together. We are the glue. And think about it like the picture up there. We're a conductor for an orchestra. You have your brass, your percussions, your strings and all those things. And we're making sure that all these security technologies are on the same sheet of music, right? So we are able to actually help them work together to benefit each other. At the end of the day, right, you've purchased these security technologies. They're doing what they're supposed to be doing. But if I can have an opportunity to take my endpoint, and if it discovers something zero-day, and it offers up, fully qualified domain names, risky, hash values and things of that nature, just don't keep it there. Let's ensure we're socializing it in the infrastructure. So I'm going to go through some high-level things around what this technology actually does from a high-level point of view, what CTEM actually is. And so I'm going to kind of break some glass, walk you through what Gartner's definition of it is, and then, time permitting, right, I'll be here, I'll answer any questions that you may have. But the first point I'm going to make, and I promise I'm not going to slideware you to death today, and usually I get into a demo. If you're interested in that, we can, talk to Nicole back here, and we can get that set up after the fact. But Gartner's definition of CTEM, and one of the reasons it was actually, built and put in as a category, was kind of what I just said. And it's really about that 60% up there. The 60% of attacks and vulnerabilities and exposures related to misconfigurations in the environment. We see that time and time again. Me as a former vulnerability guy, I used to run a report using a technology called Foundstone. And it would take probably a week for me to actually aggregate and pull in all the credentialed and non-credentialed scans and all the vulnerability data. And what was challenging for me at the end of the day was looking at and saying, all right, I have a CV in my environment. It looks bad, but how do I know that my controls are actually effectively designed to mitigate the risk of that particular vulnerability? How do I know that the IPS module is tuned correctly in order to say, yes, we have a mitigating control in place, or there's something that should change, and what is that change, and why? We want to get us out of sort of the reactive state, and CTEM allows you to basically get proactive, preemptive, shift left, all those kinds of bingo buzzwords, but at the end of the day, it's fortifying your defenses to where you're not dealing with an adversary in the environment. You have pre-tuned the infrastructure based on your risks, based on your vulnerabilities, based on your exposures, and we've turned them into insights, actionable intelligence that helps you exactly do what you need to do. So we're really looking at, day in, day out, Patch Tuesday, the endless exposures, Log4j, all those things that you are all probably household names in the security world. But we really want to take the opportunity to take these technologies and get them to work together so that way they provide a different business outcome for you. So let's keep going. All right. So this is the Gartner's definition of CTEM, right? So very high level. There's 5 phases in CTEM, okay? The first thing that Veriti does, and this technology does, is basically uses APIs to connect to the infrastructure, okay? We're not using any type of agents. The APIs are available. right? So Checkpoint APIs are super robust, CrowdStrike APIs are super robust, but not all APIs are created equally, right? I don't need them to be. The first and foremost, a vulnerability management product, all I need that for is the context of the vulnerability scan. And so what I'm going to start to do with the more integrations that are plugged into the CTEM architecture is I'm going to start to contextualize the infrastructure, and that leads me to phase two. We're going to start to assess the environment. We're literally taking these technologies and contextualizing them, figure out how everything fits together, all right? And we're using sophisticated algorithms to do that behind the scenes. And somebody bet me that I won't say AI today, but I might say AI, so apologize. But at the end of the day, right, after we've assessed the environment, we've done the discovery, we understand exactly where the integrations are and what those integrations can provide for us. We started to integrate and we started to look at those risks and vulnerabilities. What we're doing is we're prioritizing that risk. After we've gone in there and understanding how things fit together, if I have a risk over here, how is that affecting my infrastructure? How is that affecting my firewall? How is that affecting my EDR? Do I have the right controls in place that are truly mitigating the risk? So if somebody comes to me and says, hey, are we protected from this? I can quickly say yes, or I can quickly say no. And if I say no, this is what must change. This is what must change at the firewall level, at the endpoint level, or what have you, whatever control it can be. It could be a WAF, it could be a cloud infrastructure, it could be anything from your existing tool set. So that leads me to prioritization. Prioritization is really important. What do I fix first? A lot of times, right, when you look at a bunch of vulnerabilities, you're like, what's more important than the other one? Why should I start here? How do I understand, from a business context point of view, what needs to be fixed first? And so the prioritizations are very important because we're looking at things like CVSS scores, EPSS scores, but we're also looking at CISA and CERT and exploitability of that vulnerability in the environment. Because do I care about a vulnerability that's, not exploitable, that's low on the Richter scale? I don't care about that as much as one that's actually an insight in the infrastructure where it can lead me to an exposure where I am having to deal with some sort of adversary in the infrastructure. So what we're doing is we're shortening down that window of truly understanding the context of the risk in the environment so the business can actually leverage the technology to tune the controls. And many times what we find in CTEM opportunities in customers' environments, they may only be using 50% of the total capabilities of the firewall that they're paying for. So we want to help them with that. And a customer the other day, 50% of the firewall is only being leveraged, right? They had an opportunity to optimize, to enhance, to tweak the rest of the firewall infrastructure to where they're using and getting more value out of that security control, but also tuning it from a lens cap of risk and vulnerabilities and even threat intelligence to start to really reduce down the attack surface area of the infrastructure by leveraging those controls to ensure that they are functioning properly. Now, CTEM is a broad topic. If you just Google it, whatever, you're going to see a lot of CTEM. See a lot of CTEM, hits pop up. A lot of the market will say, yeah, we're full CTEM. But we have to actually look behind the covers and understand that in some cases, right, they fall a little bit short on 4 and 5. And that's what's differentiating about a lot of these CTEM technologies, that we can actually facilitate a fix in your infrastructure. Using that API, if we come to you and say, this is a risk, you should fix this, we have a big purple button in there that allows us to actually tweak over the API, tweak the policy, and ultimately deliver a risk reduction in the infrastructure. And by the way, we're tracking those things. We're tracking mean time to detect, mean time to respond from a SOC perspective to help you truly understand how you are actually moving the needle for your infrastructure. And so teams around SOC and security operations really like this because they can prove to the business that they are tangibly reducing risk using the security technologies that they've spent a lot of money on already. So validation and number 5, right? I kind of joke around, a lot of times. We give you the recipe, but we also give you the cake, right? So we're giving you both. We're giving you not only the capabilities of 1, 2, and 3, but also 4 and 5 to help you truly fix things. That big purple remediate buttons allows us to go in there and make those tweaks to the infrastructure and reduce that attack surface area. Now on the remediation side, you might ask yourself, well, that sounds kind of interesting, but we have change control. Great. So use your ITSM, plug us into your ServiceNow or whatever it may be. So that way you're properly following those changes and tracking those changes in your infrastructure. So as we remediate, we're tracking what those are and we're recording those and who is actually facilitating that. And we've built some really great two-way integrations into this to really streamline this whole entire process to make it very tangible, very easy to deliver to your business. Validation, I'll go back to 4 real quick. False positive detection. Nobody wants to actually drop a remediation in the infrastructure that potentially causes some sort of business disruption. That's bad, right? We're not going to recommend something to you and say you need to fix this without doing some level of due diligence to make sure that it's not going to cause a disruption. We call it safe remediation. So let me give you an example. The first example is you need to tweak something on the IPS. You have a high volatile CV in your environment. It's exploitable, it's high CVSS score. What do we do about it? All right, well, let's fix it, right? We need to fix this. We need to address this swiftly to start to drop out that risk. And so at the end of the day, right, this is what we call safe remediation. We take you through a guided phased approach. The first one, let's turn on the IPS signature just into watch mode, okay? Let's watch that IPS signature, look at the performance, ensure that it doesn't cause any kind of disruption in the infrastructure. And then after a period of a couple of days, we come back to you and say, all right, we're gonna flip this from activation to now hardening. Let's flip it to hardening and ultimately turn on the prevention capabilities of whatever technology you may be running at the network, for example, and ultimately start to drop any kind of exploitation towards that CVE on the firewall, okay? So we're doing this safely and we're watching the performance of the firewall before we're making those recommendations, right? We're going to prescribe something and make you request that you change something without doing that due diligence or causing some sort of false positive in your infrastructure. So I really want to be very clear about that. That is the secret sauce in CTEM, is being able to make those changes and do it in a very safe manner. Okay, so that's high level 50,000 foot view Gartner. Okay, so what we're going to get into a little bit more is about how we do this, right? And how we map to this framework. And so about 90 days ago, Check Point acquired Verity. Okay, it is a CTEM company, and the why they acquired this is because Check Point focuses on something called an open garden strategy. We're a big platform company. We got firewalls and endpoints and email security and all that kind of stuff. But we know at the end of the day, you guys are going to have a diversified set of tools, right? Different manufacturers, and we know this, and it makes sense, right? You built it, you purchased it, you implemented it based on a business need, and it checked the box. So we really developed a technology for that open garden strategy, and CTEM fits the mold for that. And the whole thing about openness is let's leverage APIs where it makes sense, right? Let's leverage their capabilities in order to actually provide tangible business value. So this thing doesn't love me too much. Am I pointing at the right direction? All right. So phase one, once again, we're mapping back to that pie chart. Phase one is integrations. We have over 80 plus integrations, right? When I first started here about 3 months ago, we had 70. We're continually adding on more and more and more, right? We're listening to our customers, right? And a couple years ago, I'd say, 10 years ago, the APIs really didn't exist in their totality today. So we really took the advantage of that. A lot of these things are very robust, and the APIs give us a lot of great insights, right? So let's integrate what you have across those 80 controls. Now, you may only have 4 or 5 or 6 controls, fine. Most of my customers actually have 10 controls implemented in this. And we're talking WAF, endpoint, network, vulnerability management, the lot of it all, even BAS tools, ASM tools, right? Because we're getting context from an ASM tool, for example, about the attack surface area outside of my business. Who's targeting me? What campaigns are they using? What are their tactics and techniques? How do they get in, right? So we're gonna incorporate those things as another layer of that context that's really driving value. But like I said, not all APIs are created equally. I don't need them to be. All I need the vulnerability management for is what? Just the context of the vulnerability scan. And then I can start to piece that together, right? Because it's hard. It's hard to basically say, here's a CVE, are we protected? We're answering that question very quickly using these APIs. If you can move it one. The next thing is assessment, right? This is phase two. We're assessing the environment. What we're really doing is leveraging those APIs to give us that context, that deep level context. I'll give you an example of a firewall. The APIs actually show me what assets sit behind what interface on the firewall. So I know if I turn something on that mitigates risk at this interface A, I know that the 150 assets or servers that sit behind it, if I make this tweak, are all of a sudden going to be mitigated against a particular threat that's causing some potential duress in this architecture, right? So there's a lot of granularity in there, and that's what we kind of call a virtual patch, and we'll get into a little bit more about that here in a moment. Security logs. We're looking at security logs. We pull in the logs so we know exactly what traffic's been happening in the environment. There is scenarios where we can actually surface up, and from a CTEM perspective, the opportunity to look at the traffic, to look at the configuration, and understand and provide you context around an active exploit and an active attack going on in your infrastructure with all the context because we're looking at logs. Now, we're not a SIEM, we're not taking hundreds and gigabytes of logs and stuffing in a database. We're skimming the logs, we're actually looking at the metadata, we extract out what we need, and then ultimately leverage those as part of the assessment phase once we're doing that contextualization. One piece that's really important, if we mitigate a risk for a CV at the firewall, but what else can we do? We can leverage IOCs, okay? It could be an IOC or a STIX or taxi feed that you guys leverage, or it could be a feed from various different locations. We provide a lot of different threat feeds for you right out of the box. Our adaptive capabilities for the firewalls and a variety of other things, or bring your own, right? What we want to be able to do is assure that all of your technologies have the right threat intelligence applied to them across the entire chasm of your security controls, right? And we want to de-silo that. So if product A finds something 0-day and identifies 5 different IOCs, don't just keep it there. Don't keep it too close to the chest, because it's something that's affecting me. It's something where I could potentially be exploited because of this. Let's make sure that we're using those intelligence feeds and socializing those properly. Here's prioritization. What compensating controls do I have? What's the business context of fixing something? What is the exposure level? What's exploitability look like for this particular vulnerability in my infrastructure? Let's do a really good job of understanding those things so we can apply the right level of prioritization in the infrastructure, so that way you know how to prioritize your time. Okay, let's fix the worst of the worst first. And we provide that context for you. And then next, validation, right? That's where I kind of touched on false positives, right? During prioritization and validation is where we're really looking at the exploitability, but also looking at if we were to turn something on, what is it going to do, okay? We want to be able to comfortably, confidently come back to you as a security operations team and say, yes, you can fix this and it will cause no business disruptions. We will highlight that right there as part of the exposure insight, okay? One customer actually told me the other day, and he's like, hey man, we got a lot of vulnerability sources. We're trying to deduplicate all this data. It's a big mess. And we're trying to make sense for what is going on in our infrastructure. And we don't know which one to trust, right? They're all kind of telling me the same thing. Well, as part of this process is deduplication, okay? So rather than looking at the same risk from the infrastructure from 3 different lens caps, we have the intelligence to bring it into one insight. So that way you're looking at the true nature of the threat and being able to identify what it is, what needs to be changed. So that's part of looking at this objectively. And then, once again, I talked about performance and analysis. So the last phase of CTEM, the remediation. This is the cake, all right? So once again, we call this safe remediation, right? CTEM should be able to prescribe to you the ability to provide non-disruptive fixes in your infrastructure. To get there, we provide that process of let's look at things from an activation, go through that analysis phase, and then ultimately deliver a hardcore, definitive, drop the mic, this is what you need to do next, and by doing this, it is safe to fix, okay? This will cause no business disruptions, it'll cause no performance implications, and therefore, we're able to actually start fortifying. And by doing that, we're going to show you precisely, by doing this and you've turned this on, you're mitigating this risk for a particular threat. Part of this is patching or virtual patching. So for example, we can tie into Intune or SCCM or a Big Fix or Tanium or whatever you have from a systems management point of view. Because they're instrumental in looking at the endpoint changes and what needs to happen in that infrastructure. So once again, de-siloing those security technologies so they're smarter, they're better, they're more effective, they're providing better value, and shrinking down that attack surface area to the point where, hopefully, the bad actor moves on because your defenses are up to par based on your total risk. Now, there's 2 different ways we do remediation. The first one is direct. Big purple button in the console, right? Depending on who you are and what your permissions are, you can click that and walk through that and go through that remediation process. Or, a very sophisticated way to do this was tying into ServiceNow or whatever ITSM product you may have. So that way the right operator, whether you're endpoint or network or whatever, goes to the right person. And then therefore they're able to evaluate this and look at it in all the context that we provide, all right? About the vulnerabilities, the risks, what needs to change, all the context, exploitability, all the things I mentioned are in that ticket. And once they approve that, right, the API bidirectionally goes back to us and we can facilitate that change for you, okay? And all of those things are tracked. So once again, either direct or through some sort of workflow depending on the circumstances of your infrastructure and how you guys like to tackle these things. Okay, so, and just summary for kind of what I just went through. The first thing we're really focused on is just helping you get better ROI from your tools. Okay, bottom line, full stop. All right, I mentioned the use case where I've got a customer, they're 53% total enabled on their firewall. They're purchased 100%, so what's the gap? There's 47% of the firewall that they're not actually leveraging regarding the IPS signatures. It's not tuned. And every time there's a Patch Tuesday or some sort of threat out there, how do you know? How are you able to effectively look at that threat and say, all right, what must change? Or how are you mapping that up? We're taking all of that off the table. We're making it very clear on what is the actual end result, what must change from the contextual point of view of the firewall configuration relative to the vulnerability or risk in the infrastructure. We're helping customers across the board get away from analysis paralysis. Now I know sometimes making a change is hard because we're trying to always understand, all right, if we change something, what's gonna happen? And in the world that we live in Houston, Texas, right? There's a lot of IT and OT and embedded environments and things of that nature, right? Well, those are usually the breadwinners. Those are the critical infrastructure. Those are revenue generating architectures. So once again, we want to give you that clear line of sight to help you look at those objectively, to understand what must be fixed, to ensure that if we make a change, right, we're not going to disrupt that infrastructure, those revenue generating architectures, whether it's IT, OT, just whatever. And then reducing labor costs, removing the analysis paralysis, giving you confidence and context around the vulnerability. What must change? Why it must change? These are always the questions I was asking myself. And I would always get asked, hey, Chris, are we protected against this? And I'm like, I don't know, I'll have to get back to you. I'd have to go to my endpoint person. I'd have to go to my network person. They'd have to call the vendor. Do we have a signature? Do we have a protection? What do I need to tweak in my environment? We're doing that for you. There's no more of that, we think we need to block it, but let me double check and let me get a signature or whatever. It's clear. It's all within that one insight around that exposure. So at the end of the day, it's reducing the time it takes to start mitigation. So some of the benefits, right, we'll get into this, is that safe remediation? I'll call those out. Virtual patch deployment, in some cases, right, the vendor hasn't released a signature for something, and right, you need a stopgap. You need to be able to block right now. You need to be able to contain right now. You need to make sure that something's in place that mitigates. So in many cases, right, I've got a customer and they're doing manufacturing and they still have Windows 7 in their environment. It is what it is. We all have those legacy operating systems. We all have Linux and other stuff that potentially can't be patched. So, but can I? In most cases, the answer is yes. Look at that Windows 7 environment that has a fixed function device that's doing one thing on that supply chain, and then turn around and say, yep, I made that little snap, that context, and I put something at the network that surrounds that infrastructure, and ultimately starts to look at that track objectively so that Windows 7 environment is safe, is safer because we've applied a network patch. So lots of things to kind of work through, and we'll kind of get through a couple of use cases. So how much time do I have? I'm sorry, I should have asked. Did we go to 30 minutes? Okay. Well, I know I've gone too long if everyone starts getting up and leaving, so, so I'll be a little bit more focused here. All right, try to get it to go. Next slide. All right. So the first thing I'm going to go through is vulnerability prioritization or remediation. Come on, you can do it. I don't think it likes me. All right, let's just go ahead and build that out if you guys could. All right. So one of the things that I really like about this is that, we get threat intelligence from multiple different sources. Okay, do we trust it? Oh, I hope so. Are they telling me the same thing? Probably. Because eventually they all kind of catch up to each other, right? They start to learn about the adversary and any kind of IOCs related to it. So what we really want to do is make sure that, we're digesting multiple feeds, right? It's up to you on what you want to apply. Even if you're not a CrowdStrike customer, you can use us to apply a CrowdStrike feed in your infrastructure. It's pretty cool. Or you can bring your own once again. So what we're doing right here is digesting multiple thread feeds. We're cross-correlating, deduplicating, validating the relevancy. Because what's the point of putting in an IOC in the infrastructure? There's no reason to do so. Or let's assess the firewall, the endpoint, right? To make sure there's nothing on there that's stale, right? Is it fresh? Is it relevant to what's going on in the environment right now? And in many cases, we start to interface with customers and plug this into an environment where they haven't been updating their IOCs in 30 days, right? I would venture to say, and sometimes in 3 hours or 3 days, sometimes that IOCs and that information is stale. So we want to make sure it's relevant and it's current. And so what we're doing after we get to this phase, we're automatically propagating this to all your security tools, okay? All right, that's just general cherry on top stuff aside from the actual vulnerability itself, okay? So that is a key thing. So the next slide, please. I'm just giving up on this thing. All right, go ahead and build it out, please. Thank you. Another really cool use case that I really like about this as far as CTEM, exposure management, is leveraging the use case I talked about earlier, all right? I find a 0 day, like there's a lot of really great tools out there that look at stuff objectively, and then through behavioral analytics, they extract some sort of threat. They're looking at it, and all of a sudden we're looking at it objectively and saying, all right, this technology is telling me that part of this and this exploitation, this exposure, the bad guy is using these 10 different IOCs. We found it at the firewall level. Should we keep it there? The answer is no. We should be able to leverage that. And so what we're doing here is we're taking a file hash from a checkpoint, from a Palo, from a Cisco, from wherever it's sourced, and then piping it into the threat exposure management platform. And by doing so, we're able to actually derive and apply that 0 day, potentially 0 day, or unknown threat intelligence, unknown to us. Might have never seen it before, and ultimately apply it to everything that's not that firewall, or multiple different firewalls of multiple different manufacturers. In some cases, I have customers that have Checkpoint, Palo, Fortinet, this, and this. All right, it's common. We see this, right? They have Fortinet for the OT infrastructure, cool. All right, but let's not keep it in one place. Let's make sure all the firewalls are aware of these threats and these IOCs, okay? So that's use case number 2. So go ahead and build it up. So, I feel like I'm being punked. All right, so third use case, accelerate threat response and eliminate the silos, right? So what we're doing here is we're continuously analyzing the infrastructure. We're looking at those logs. Remember, we're not storing logs. We're not a compliance checkbox. We're looking at the logs objectively. We're bringing them in through our engines and our algorithms. We're looking at those exposures relative to the traffic, and we're pulling out what needs to be really analyzed, okay? So at the end of the day, right, what we're doing here is looking at those logs, we're piping it through the platform, it's doing its due diligence to validate the attacker, enrich the intelligence, because sometimes, if I fix something at the firewall level, I'm not just applying an IPS block, for example. I'm applying a block and I'm applying IOCs as part of the threat mitigation strategy for a particular exposure, okay? So it's not just fixing a configuration, it's ensuring that you're also, relative to the threat landscape, relative to the vulnerability, you have the right IOCs in place. That's part of threat exposure management. So, and that's what we call our adaptive block list. Don't keep it with just firewall A. Let's make sure A, B, and C are on the same page. Remember, I'm the conductor. All right, so lots of stuff here. All right, keep building out to the next one. All right, so one thing, if you ever see a demo with me, one thing that I'm gonna focus on is there's right on the dashboard, you come in there with your pumpkin spice latte. It is the season, right? And you kind of look at the environment, you look at the dashboard, and what it's gonna do, it's constantly refreshing itself, continuous threat exposure management. And so as we refresh the architecture and look at the context and reconfiguring and replugging in and reanalyzing and all those great things that we do, one of the things that we do is recommend from the dashboard perspective something called controls hardening, okay? Once again, you're only using 53% of that firewall relative to your exposures, right? Things need to change because we're not mitigating a large swath of the detected risks in the infrastructure. What must change? That is where this technology comes to play. It will surface up the actual insight, which is based on your exposure, okay? The insight, click, go right into the console, and it's gonna say, all right, here's the context of what you need to know. Here are the relative CVEs. Here's the bad actors associated with it. Here are the endpoints that are in duress. Here's where it was last seen. Here's what you need to do about it. All of those things, one-stop shop, okay? And that is step one of this process. Step one is to turn the signature on into watch mode. It's what we call protection activation. We're gonna activate the signature, and then we start that process of analyzing the threats, we're analyzing the performance, we're analyzing the logs, and then after a period of time, we'll flip it and turn it into, now you are safe to block. It's what we call protection hardening, okay? CTIM terms, right? So I'm trying to spare you a lot of four-letter bingo buzzwords, right? But those are CTIM terms, right? So during that entire process, applying the right controls, helping you prioritize, all right? So security controls hardening. And what we see a lot of customers look at, and they go, oh, we're at 53%. They start objectively looking at those risks, start to go for the highest, and you start to see it go from 53% to 70%, 80, 90%. Total capabilities. You're using more of the firewall for what it was built to do, what it was purchased for, okay? Okay. Thanks, guys. All right, so once again, I built, kind of walk you through this, so just to recap, control configurations, looking at best practice are two key things that we're doing relative to your exposures, relative to things around the firewall health. And it even sometimes, right, I hear this from Fortinet customers all the time, we're constantly having to patch the firewall for new firmware, all right? We will surface those things for you. It's part of the health exercise, the configuration exercise in the form of the exposure. And that is a category that we have. There's many different forms of exposures. Remember, under attack scenarios, protection activation, licensing, all of those things. There's probably, I would say, 30 different exposure types that you can actually glean from your infrastructure. So in some cases, we can go back, in some cases, right, we see right here, false positive detected. I have a customer and they use Verity for their OT environment, and they have wind turbines. You know, those big things that are going down the freeway and those big blades, all right? So wind turbines. And they had a situation where they had a big pool of turbines and they weren't updating. The network was dropping the traffic. Why? It was benign traffic, it shouldn't have been blocking it, but there was a misconfiguration in the infrastructure in some form. They weren't updated to update their logs, their firmware, or anything like that. So false positive detection could be not only made sure we're not bringing in a false positive, but if one exists already in the infrastructure that's dropping good, benign traffic, we will surface that up as an exposure, an insight, and advise you on what must change to allow those wind turbines to communicate properly, okay? So there are two different ways that we look at false positive detections, right? One from the perspective of safe remediation, but also is there an existing condition in the infrastructure that should be addressed through exposure management. All right, so just in summary, right, you know, spare you all the words up here, right? The thing I really want to hone in on is the safe remediation piece. The next thing I'm going to hone in on is flexible remediation options, using just APIs to do that or using ITSM tools. Ask yourself how you do this today, all right? How long is that process? Can it be refined? Can we actually do a better job of actually assuring the business that we have the right controls in place and they are configured correctly? What does that process look like for you? We take all of that off the table and completely streamline all of the analysis paralysis and the data aggregation to make sure that you really understand what must happen. So at the end of the day, right, you know, it is that de-siloing effect by leveraging that existing tool set. We're the glue that brings it all together to kind of help you guys understand where you're strong, where you're weak, what must change. I urge you, just like, let me just show you, right, at the end of the day. So I think I'm almost getting to the point of conclusion. Next slide, please. All right, one more, thank you. So this is a customer situation. If you can move one more. Thank you. Yeah, I mean, this is kind of a, everybody knows King's Hawaiian, right? And those little rolls that we get at the backyard barbecue, they're delicious. So they're a customer, right? Publicly customer, right? And so their environment was Microsoft, Intune, Azure, ServiceNow, CrowdStrike, Fortinet. Very heterogeneous infrastructure. Harris Health Center's here in town. They have 10 integrations right out of the box, right? The conclusion that I had with Harris was that the fact that after 3 months, they reduced the vulnerabilities in their infrastructure roughly 30%. And I said, well, how long would it have taken you to get ahead of this stuff had you not had Verity in place? He goes, we would have never have gotten there, or it would have taken us 3 years, and we'd have to hire a bunch of contractors to help us do it. Okay? So that's a really good ROI in the sense of being able to streamline that infrastructure. And so tons of value, but really for these folks, right? Firewall, WAF, endpoint. And I kind of joke, right? How do you start with CTEM? What technology should I start first? I'm Cajun, so I'm going to say carrots, onion, and celery, right? For a roux, why not? So endpoint, network, vulnerability management. So if you have those things, that is an amazing place to start, regardless of which CTEM vendor you look at, right? That derives the most context, because those are all the packets going across the infrastructure, and the human being sits there right on the keyboard, so the EDR is important, all right? And then we pull in the risks and the vulnerabilities. And it doesn't matter if it's Rapid7 or Qualys or whatever. Let's plug them in. And in some cases, certain technologies like CrowdStrike have Spotlight, okay? That's a vulnerability management capability. So if we're using all of those things, when we pull in those risks, well, let's deduplicate, let's create one insight that's contextually relevant and give you the guys the right course of action to take in order to mitigate your risk. And that's really where they started. Is looking at F5, looking at the environment, right? And the outcome is, ultimately using us as a cornerstone of how they do security operations today, right? I'd be very upset if I went to HEB and I couldn't find my King's Hawaiian rolls, right? So anyway, so that's kind of a high level use case. I could keep going on and on and on about these, but I came over to Verity just in closing. It's a startup out of Tel Aviv. And so somebody called me up and be like, hey, you want to come over here? And I'm like, I don't know, what is it? And after I started looking at the demo and the opportunity, because I'm an old school security guy, right? I mean, I know people in this room who have seen, sort of the evolution of all these security tools, right? From platform to vendor to this to best of breed and all these things. The things we want to help you do is not just help you with your vendor spend, but also optimize your existing controls. Let's get you more value out of those things. And so the evolution of this for me, thinking back when I was that vulnerability engineer, getting hundreds of pages of vulnerabilities, and the pain that I had to go through every week with somebody breathing down my neck was like a feeling that I didn't want to experience ever again. So I look at this technology and I'm like, this is different. Many people call it sort of the vulnerability management 3.0. We're not a vulnerability scanner, but we're helping you understand what is happening in the infrastructure contextually with a relevant sense of what must change. So that's where I'm going to leave you, right? If you're looking at CTEM vendors, don't just look for the recipe, look for the recipe in the cake, right? There are 5 phases of CTEM. Can they help you fix, or are they just helping you prioritize? And that yet you still have to go to the security tool and make the change yourself, right? What value can you put on remediation, safe remediation? And what value can you put on being able to truly provide the context to your business that yes, we got this, right? So I'll leave you with that. I'll stick around for questions. And I got us out of here. Yeah, oh, and what? Oh, if you can walk by Nicole. I promise she won't chase you down the hallway, but she might. But I'll stick around for any questions. If anybody has any questions, please hit me up. Yes, sir. Thank you.
I'm curious on the allocation, right? Your example was like an IPS signature and all that. How do you truly validate that the, let's say, web traffic that has the extra in it doesn't actually get y'all launch kind of sanitize permission tables? Can you integrate that fast? Can you do that?
Yeah.
How do you actually validate?
Yeah. So it's context of multiple different security tools bringing into the algorithm. The algorithm is actually doing that due diligence. So we're looking at the logs of the traffic flowing through the firewall. We're looking at the vulnerabilities that have been detected relative to the firewall. We're analyzing the configuration of the firewall to say, based on the traffic we've seen and the known vulnerability and the packets that we're seeing, what must change? Is a signature in place that actually will give us the visibility into this traffic? And so at the end of the day, what it's really doing It's looking at logs, looking at configuration, comparing the notes, studying the traffic, and ultimately deriving a confidence score that says this is safe to turn on in activation. Let's watch it, phase 1, okay? Because we don't want to, I'm not a hammer and everything's a nail. I'm not going to turn on to start blocking everything. Nobody's got time for that because it's just going to end up poorly. But if we go through the activation phase, most of the time it takes us about 7 days on average, sometimes a little bit faster. And once we do that activation phase, we're studying that, and we're even looking at over different protocols, SNMP, a variety of other things to ascertain the firewall condition, the performance implications, because I've been around IPSs all my life in some form. I've seen situations where we put a snort signature in there and it blows up the box. Nobody had time for that, all right? So we're not doing that. It's a complex thing, and that's why they spent about 2 years writing this algorithm to do this. So the guys who were at Checkpoint before, they left, they build this, they get some funding, and they come back and say, it's prime time. And so they're super confident in the way we do this analysis. And I can show you, right? I can show you. Good question. Yeah. Yes. Yeah. 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 I mean, a simple way to kind of answer that question is like, you know, and the question was, how do we ascertain the business context of certain things, right? If I know that I have 140, you know, Windows devices and I know they're not patched or they can't be patched, that's one thing, all right? So in the form of an exposure, what is the business impact by them not being patched? You're at risk, you're at vulnerable, right? And so we're looking at those contexts, for example, and the confidence score is part of that, but also mean time to remediation. We are tracking a lot of context around not only the fix, but how long it's taking to fix and deriving MTTR in a lot of cases. So we can go back to business and say, look at how we are progressing the needle and fortifying our defenses objectively, okay? But the business context comes with, here's a critical asset. Let's tag the asset like a domain controller, okay? Those things need to be protected, right? So we can put criticality scores to certain things based on critical infrastructure, how we tag things, which also dictates how we derive insights and the workflow. So it's up to you, because I won't understand everything about your infrastructure, but I will know that you will have critical things that are critical to the business. And so that's where you guys come in to some degree to enhance the context of what we deliver. Yep. Yep. Ed, did you have a question? He works for Checkpoint. Are you setting me up?
Can you tell us what's ahead? What are we going to improve on? What's next?
Yes. Oh yeah. Well, yeah, sure. Yeah, in the Checkpoint world, there's two technologies. One is threat exposure management, and the other one is enterprise risk management. It's a company called Cyberint that is a BAS tool, a breach attack simulation tool, or an attack surface management tool. We kind of call them the fall same categories. And what you're going to see next is, like, when I first started, we were at 70 integrations. Now we have 80. Cool. Right? We're going to continue to add more, right? We're going to add Checkpoint's email, which is awesome. We're going to add additional network controls, and it's really based on the market, right? And what you guys want. It takes us about 2 weeks to build an integration once we have access to the API, okay? And so a lot of times customers are like, well, we really need this integration because of X, Y use case, and we'll build it. The team is very adept at building that and right into those APIs. So that is one step, is bringing to bear more integrations, right, where it makes sense. The next one is bringing together enterprise risk management, or ASM, which is external, and bringing that into internal, right? So the attack surface area of the external is now contextually derived and applied to my internal controls. So bad actors that are leveraging certain IOCs and against you on the periphery are now going to be socialized to your internal controls, okay? So tactics and techniques and IOCs are part of that whole process. So we're going to continue to enhance that and continue to bring more integrations to bear. Yeah. All right, well, thank you so much, guys. Appreciate it.